Well, I think we have everyone here, and I know people will be logging on throughout, but just in the interest of respecting everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started. And, first of all, just want to say thank you to Meghan, Brad, and Jeff for joining us. I'm sure that all of your day jobs have been extremely busy over the past few weeks, so appreciate you carving out some of your time to spend with us and the group that we have. For those of you that have tuned into these before, the Survive to Thrive series, my name's Nick Miller. I'm the executive director at the Venture College at Boise State, which is a program in the College of Innovation and Design. And we are putting this on in partnership with Trailhead. The executive director of Trailhead, TM Rostigar, has joined us as well. And he and I are kind of tag teaming this and fielding questions from the group that's online here, as well as throwing out questions that either Venture College participants or Trailhead members have posed to us. This topic in particular, marketing during a crisis, I think is one that's been top of mind for a lot of folks, and how they do it in a way that is both effective as well as compassionate and acknowledges the situation, but also acknowledges that they need to still continue to provide services and market their business. So I'm really excited for the discussion with the three folks that we have joining us today, and I will introduce them real briefly, and then we will throw it to them just for some opening remarks. And I think a couple of them may have some materials or slides to share. So we'll test out the screen sharing technology and see if we can get that to work. If not, we'll just. And then from there, we'll just have a discussion. So if you haven't already, please open up the chat. You can submit questions there and we'll get them over to the panelists. Panelists, and maybe we'll start with the furthest west. Meghan Gardner is a VP at Matter in Portland. Meghan is connected to the Boise ecosystem. It was actually out here for Boise Startup Week last week, and is someone that we're really happy to have join us. I know that she has at least one employee here in Boise, and knows a lot of folks in our ecosystem. So thank you for joining us, Meghan. Next up, we have Jeff Reynolds, the president at Reynolds+Myers. Jeff's also a startup mentor, does a lot of building of things, builds up people, companies, ecosystems, and has just been a very active participant in the Boise startup ecosystem. And finally, we have Brad Weigle. Brad's the co-founder of Against, and it's also a colleague of mine at the College of Innovation and Design, where he leads the Idea Certificate with Jenny Myers. That focuses on creativity and emerging technologies, and is a really popular and fast-growing program who were very well positioned for this new online world, as they've been doing a lot of that work already. So maybe starting there, and we can go in the reverse order. Brad, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, definitely. So name's Brad. I work at Against here in Boise, and we're a creative company for Rebel brands. And we help clients with everything from branding and advertising and packaging, web design, and everything in between. Clients hire us to help them work through their biggest creative challenges and opportunities. And we specialize in working with brands that want to go against the grain and not follow the typical playbook for their industry. Co-founded the agency with my business partner, Jenny Myers, just over a year ago now. We picked a hell of a time to start a new business. And we're in a very similar situation to you all, that trying to operate a business and find success in this new environment. And appreciate you having me here, Nick and TM.
Great, thanks for joining us. Jeff, do you want to give us a few of your thoughts?
Well, I guess the thing that I think bring to this conversation is I have a split personality in the sense that I spend my days working with companies that really count the revenue in tens of millions and billions of dollars through Reynolds+Myers, where we help legacy companies evolve into modern marketers. But where the fuel for that comes from is really my passion for young and startup companies. I distinguish the two, but we can talk more about that later. And I'm an operator myself. I have companies that I operate in. I operate Net Camps. It's an online sports company that has been hammered by this situation. We went to zero revenue a couple weeks ago for the first time first time ever, weekly revenue. And so that's an example. And then Simply Eloped is a company I serve on the board, and they're the world's largest wedding planner, obviously another industry hammered by this situation. And then Art of Visuals, which is the world's largest creator community, and they're actually holding up quite well, and we can talk a little bit more about that. So I guess all I'm trying to say is my lens really comes from this place of having wrestled startups both now and in the past, sort of from the brink of death during downturns. I've succeeded and I've failed in that, especially back in 2007. And I just hope I can share what I learned. I do want to say that I really believe that, everything is basically going to be okay. Like I think as a system and as a society, we're going to get through it, and many of us will emerge stronger. It doesn't mean that there's not pain and that there isn't going to be more pain. But so I guess my last sort of opening remark would be, it has nothing to do with marketing, really. It's really just that during these sorts of times, I think it's important that we're all kind to ourselves, that we do our best, and we just keep chugging through the resistance and all the temptations sort of to get unfocused, and instead just get up and do the work. So I guess that's my opening thought.
Thank you, Jeff. Meghan, we'll toss it over to you from Portland to get your perspective.
Sounds great. Thanks. Thrilled to be here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. As Nick mentioned, I work with Matter, and our clients are across a lot of industries, but especially concentrated in B2B technology and in the startup world generally, whether that's on the consumer or on the B2B side of things. And we are seeing and hearing a really diverse set of reactions from our clients. Some of them, like Fight TV, didn't have a business model anymore because their business model is built on broadcasting live sporting events. And some of them are experiencing massive boom because what they do is help with real-time communications. That's Agora, a software company based out of Silicon Valley and China. And they're helping, for example, within the first few weeks of the epidemic in China, got 1 million students online for tutoring within a few days. So there's a really wide variety of responses that we're seeing. Like you, Jeff, and like many on the call, I'm sure, I too have sort of weathered a few different big storms, whether it was 9/11 or the dot-com bust or, the banking crisis in 2008. And I'm thankful that I can draw on that perspective, but I'm also drawing on my experience for many years studying yoga, which may sound weird, so stay with me, guys, stay with me, everybody. One of the things that you learn a lot about when you study things like yoga is detachment and how to let go of the things that you can't control, and how to identify them in the first place, and how to focus your energy on the things that you can control, knowing that ultimately you can control inputs, but not outcomes. And so coming from that kind of a place and talking with both my clients and my team and trying to help them stay focused and motivated, to your point, Jeff, a very good one. How do you stay focused on the work when everything around you seems like this massive temptation to not stay focused? It's particularly acute right now, but it's actually underlying everything we do every day anyway. So how do we kind of harness that sense of control over inputs and letting go of the outcomes? So I'm excited to share what I can about that, but also hear other folks' reactions about how they're managing that.
Awesome, thank you. I love the diversity of perspectives and experience that we have. Everything from early stage startups to using things like yoga and different things like that to cope with this. And I think all the tools in the toolbox are going to be used and sharpened during this time. So just appreciate those remarks. So maybe to start it out on a positive note, what, if any, upsides or market opportunities are you seeing as you think about your world in marketing? One of our past panelists talked about how online ads have become incredibly cheap as of late. So are there any other insights that you would offer up to this group to think through that they may not be aware of, or things that you might see as an opportunity for these folks if they are looking for those right now? Okay, no opportunities. All right.
Well, I think it's a tricky question to answer, because I think the earlier point that was made by Meghan is that it's so market by market and even tactic by tactic. It's hard to say broadly. We think about it more of, less about like the right now and more on how you're investing in the future. Like how are you taking time right now to do the work that you wouldn't be able to get to in the past? I mean, yeah, you're right, Nick. There are definitely sort of niches where, you're seeing opportunity, like in some digital ad space, but those arbitrage opportunities always exist. So it's hard for me to give specific advice around, that, as much as I would say there are things we don't want to do, potentially for a lot of clients around email and some other things. But we think about it more as like, what are you doing right now to invest in long-term opportunities to win when on the other side of all this?
Yeah, we're doing some of that internally. In fact, clients aside for the moment, we're doing some of that internally. If our video team has some sudden bandwidth because they're not able to fly across the country and do a shoot because everyone's canceled everything, what can those folks do? And so we've turned attention to our marketing program, and we've created these kind of suites of DIY content. How do you do a podcast? How do you create video content from remotely and in remote collaboration? Like, how do you make post-production happen? All of those sorts of things have been helpful to us internally, like as a company, to figure out. We've got a little bit of time on our hands, but certainly there's a lot of uncertainty. So how do we, to your point, Jeff, make that investment? With our clients, it's true, it depends so much on the marketplace, but what we're trying to do with them is look at, okay, it feels like you've got this massive problem ahead of you. Let's break that into small pieces and help you figure out, even if there's too much market uncertainty, for example, for you to sign on for a year-long PR retainer, right? We do a lot of PR work. That's the core of our business. If that feels like too much right now, let's focus on what you really need to get done. For some of our clients, demand gen has gone through the floor and they really need support in creative digital campaigns. For some of our clients, demand gen has gone through the roof unexpectedly, and what they need is relationship management strategies. For some of our clients, they've got to undergo layoffs or furloughs in the manufacturing industry. How do they deal with internal communications? So we're really looking at how do we quickly package and spool up solutions for those. And we're doing the same with ourselves internally. How do we quickly package and spool up our expertise to make that more relevant? And we're finding that that's a helpful way to help the markets that we serve address big problems with small, shorter term solutions, even as they keep an eye on that longer term, what happens in 2 months or 6 months or 18 months. We're not really sure what the time frame is.
Yeah, and I think to that point, when I talk to the startups I work with, most of them aren't just changing marketing strategies; they're changing product strategies.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think that's basically what part of what you're saying. I totally agree with that. Like, really thinking about, are there different ways to sell or create products that suit the market right now, not just how do you shift your message.
Yeah, yep. I think for some of us, at least, we've been given the gift of time that it almost has slowed down a little bit. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely a scramble to all of this, but for a lot of us, there's this gift of time where we have a little bit of time to focus efforts that we necessarily haven't been in a good time for reflection. And the things that we're thinking about with our clients is yes, let's look at today and empathize with the customer of today, and all of a sudden being conscientious of price and value is a thing again, just like we saw in 2007, 8, 9, and 10. Convenience and delivery, those kinds of things are all important to today's customer. But kind of thinking through your company in 3 phases. What is today looking like? What's it going to look like when we quote unquote get back to normal and people start going back to work? What are the opportunities that lie on the other side of that? And then the third, which is a scary one, but what happens if this comes back in the fall and winter? Some experts predict that could happen. And while scary, the one advantage we have is we know what it somewhat could look like. We're a little bit more prepared this time going into it. So what kind of investment can you be making in your messaging, your marketing, your systems to be able to prepare your business for a remote environment later this year, which is a possibility, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually a good segue to a question that was just posted. And let me try to give you a little bit of a frame. So we've generally talked about 2 categories of businesses: those whose business model now is obsolete because of the situation, and those who are finding ways to strive, potentially pivot their product or pivot their business model. So if we focus kind of on the slice that's left in the middle, those that are coasting and looking to survive this in order to thrive on the other end of it, as they are making changes to their business model, as they are making changes to how they communicate value and pricing and features and benefits, all those things that you guys mentioned. Let's get tactical. What are some ways in them communicating that to their future customers, to their current customers, as the entity themselves is going through change, and so is their product and their business model?
So are you asking basically about channels and tactics specifically?
Yeah, that's what the question that was put in the chat is. Channels and tactics.
And I think, I mean, I'll be interested to hear what the other panelists think. I think this is where it gets tricky to answer, and I'm not trying to be avoiding it, but really there's a misunderstanding that marketing is sort of about tactics and channels. Everybody's rushing to those same channels, right? We all were complaining about the emails that we got from our veterinarian of 6 years ago, telling us what they're doing about COVID or whatever. So I think there are places where we're sort of warning clients to tread lightly. Email being one of them. I mean, for a lot of our clients, we've actually paused, especially for the first couple of weeks there, we were pausing all advertising, digital advertising mostly, and most email unless it's very specific. So how about this one for an idea? We pick up the phone. And we have conversations, and we step away from this idea of mass marketing in times like this and try to go more one-on-one. Obviously, it depends on the company. It depends, but if you have a sales force, even if you're a $1 billion publicly traded company, you have a sales force that can become more human during this time and just have conversations. So personally, I think it's almost as much about tone and sort of what you're striking in the messaging as it is the channel. The channel becomes hopefully obvious if you know how you want to say it. So in other words, when somebody wants to, if the CEO has a message to get out, the best approach usually isn't to just do some mass, banner ad campaign or something, right? Like that wouldn't make sense. So figure out the message first and then match that message with the channel. That's first stab at that that answer.
I think to build on that, the third kind of dimension is the audience, and that's one of the things we all learn very early on in our careers and our schooling, right? Know your audience, and this is not the moment to engage in inside out thinking, but rather outside in thinking. Because if you know your audience, you know what they want from you. And if you don't know your audience, it's rarely a good idea to make assumptions that you do, but now is especially not the moment to make wild guesses, right? Now is the moment to instead go back to your existing network and figure out who do you already know, who might connect you to people, information, and ideas that are going to make you more effective, and take a very surgical approach. I hate that metaphor, but take a very purposeful approach, right? Because you can always match that message to that channel effectively. Certain information comes across better over email, over a cooler landing page, over whatever else it is. But knowing that individual that you think is going to receive that message, we had as an example, we had a very late stage conversation going with a telehealth company just before the crisis really started to reach its peak here in the US. And they're a little busy now. So even though they've got a major proposal from our company in their hands, and even though I've got a very good working relationship going with one of the decision makers, this definitely isn't the moment for me to put the pressure on to get them to make the decision, right? I mean, yes, that sounds obvious. So my emails with her have been, hey, just saying hello. I'm sure your team is really stretched. Let us know if we can help. Otherwise, I'll just check in a little while. Just thinking of you, kind of an email. And it's gone over well. It's not helping me achieve that revenue goal more quickly necessarily. But again, taking that longer view, it's more likely to position me as a human being talking to another human being who might benefit from what I have to say down the line, even if they can't use it right now.
Yeah. I love where the conversation's going. Looking at it as a one-to-one communication, one to few, and then one to many. I love the recommendation from Jeff on phone calls, especially for the service-based businesses out there. Whether it's a phone call, a direct email where you're just reaching out to that person, it's a very custom message. It's really important, especially for those service-based businesses. You don't have that luxury as you get to be a bigger product-based business, and when you're trying to service a lot of people. And so when you look for those channels that are one to a few, you start looking at how can you participate in communities and online communities and conversation, whether that's subreddits or conversation around certain hashtags or LinkedIn groups or Facebook groups, whatever that might be. Just participating that into something that feels a little bit more quaint and custom. And then you get into the bigger channels, which might be where the question was originally asked, of what are the bigger channels that we can use to communicate to people. And as the panel's kind of alluded to, it's difficult without knowing the product or service. But I think the big ones we know most people are going to Facebook and Google. I think 70 cents of every dollar on digital ads are spent with Facebook, Instagram, and Google. And those platforms make it really easy, especially for small business owners that don't have access to a digital marketer or an agency right now to go in and kind of self-promote those things on those platforms. But look at what you have from a customer standpoint. What do you know about your customers? Do you have emails? Do you have phone numbers? What are the ways that you can communicate with them that are a little bit different than just going on and blasting with a banner ad or a Facebook ad?
Yeah. And to build, Brad, on what you're saying, I think, we have not, I said we stopped digital ads. That's true with interruptive media, i.e. Facebook and banners and these sorts of things, but not true for search. We've kept search, which is intent-based. In other words, people looking for you. Yeah. We've kept that rolling. We haven't stopped that, I don't believe, with any client, and it's a major driver for many of our clients. So I think search, paid search specifically, is a good place to start. The other just general thinking about this issue is that I think what the lessons here is, the saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the next best time is today, really applies here. Like what we're trying to say is, if your marketing program relies on sort of a constant direct response, interruptive style of promotion, it might be time to add some depth to that, to be able to protect yourself, not just from situations like this, but any number of sort of unpredictable events.
I think that's a great point, and kind of speaking to both what you just said, Jeff, and Brad, a point you made a moment ago. The role of agencies like the companies that we run in this, if you're a small business and you don't have the budget to hire agencies, or if you have an agency on a relatively limited basis, now is the time to really challenge them to say to your agencies, or to say to agencies who have approached you, how can we make something work? I need expertise. I need counsel. I need advice. My budget is tiny. How, can we work on something? Because a lot of agencies are looking to be just like you, more flexible, look at their markets with fresh eyes, and really understand how we can adapt our business models to match more what you need. So again, it doesn't apply to everyone. I get that, but I think it's worth keeping an open mind, particularly if you are looking at changing marketing tactics and strategies, having people challenging the people who usually charge you a whole lot of money to help you do that, to figure out how to do that with you. Now's a good moment to do it.
So I think what we're hearing is almost a back to basics approach, right? Of these larger channels right now may not be the best space for you. So picking up the phone, maintaining those relationships, and just taking time to nurture those is probably the best thing that most folks can do right now. And kind of pulling on the thread of preparing yourself for not only the short term but also the mid to long term. Are there any call them DIY tactics? I think you talked a little bit about this, Megan, but are there any things that some of these smaller business owners may be able to do in the short term as they prepare to succeed in the mid to long term, where they could focus on content creation, or they could adapt or adopt some of the practices that you all would recommend to them eventually, but there may be some things that they may be able to do on their own in a situation where they're in a budget crunch. Any resources or recommendations on that?
Yeah, a few ideas right off the bat. We actually, as a company, produced a bunch of resources that are basically just how-tos. So I'm more than happy to circulate that to this group through you, Nick, and TM after this, if that would be useful to people. It really is DIY stuff. It's not, here's a little tip and then you have to call us. So happy to share that. I think a few other ideas that come to mind that maybe aren't as obvious are, one, partnering up. There's strength in numbers. If there are businesses in your ecosystem that are also of interest to your audiences, or their services that complement yours, combining powers and figuring out how to make your combined budgets or your combined strategies work harder together. And sometimes doing that through business organizations, whether that's the chamber, small business associations. The SBA nationally, I realize, is a little busy right now, but industry associations and others, asking them how they can help you. That's one idea that comes to mind as well.
I have a couple pulled out that I can maybe share with you all. I'm going to try to share my screen, see if this actually works. There we go. You guys see that?
Worked.
Sweet. So this is a tool that Genst built about a year ago now, and it's called the Hack Pack, and it's 200 plus hacks and no code tools for marketing, branding, advertising, etc. We pulled out a few for this talk today. So basically what you get is a grid of all of these different tools, and I'll just point out a few of them that might make sense for this conversation. Albacross is a little pixel that you can install on your website. And then every piece of traffic that comes to your website, it'll actually do an IP address lookup, and it'll tell you what company that is. So for you service-based businesses that are trying to get leads, you can install this and it'll actually tell you what those companies are that are looking at your website. Answer the Public, you can type in a word, a term, whether it's your brand name, a product name, and it'll go out and scrape all of the Google autocompletes out there, and it'll build a list for you so that you can find out what people are searching for, what questions they have around a various term. So it's a really great piece of just insight for a various term or brand. Card is a really fast way to build up a one-page website. So if you need to create a one-page prototype website on the fly to launch and test a new thing, check that one out. Super easy to use. Let's see, I'm going to move my face out of the way. Digital psychology. We're all in this environment where we're trying to figure out how to market in these new digital spaces, and it's changing by the day. This one is just some good foundational information on how people react, buy, and consume in a digital world. So really nice little bite-size learning article there. Hotjar, I think you get 1,000 recordings for free, but basically you install this on your website or app, and it'll record 1,000 user sessions, all anonymous so that you can't creep on your customers or anything, but you can see heat maps and recordings of your users and how they're using your site, which will lead to some insights on some things you need to improve. Front over here, Front is it's a modern platform where it'll connect all of your various direct messaging channels. So your phone numbers, your emails, your Instagram direct messages, whatever, all into one platform, and you can have a service team built right in. So if you have multiple people answering customer requests, really easy to set up, really easy to get going, and it's a really great app. Let's see here, Mailjoy. So everybody's thinking of like MailChimp and sending out e-blasts. Think Mailjoy is MailChimp, but for direct mail. So instead of sending it as email, you can actually build up your postcards and things and then send everything through this one platform. So it just makes it really easy to send out a direct mail campaign if you have a list of addresses from your customers. Maybe I'll do one or two more here. Impact and effort. This is just a strategy process. So take all of your initiatives that you're thinking about, and I know all of your teams right now are coming up with a lot, and map them on this map here. So think about how much effort it's going to take to accomplish that initiative and how much impact it's going to make. And for anything that's falling into high effort and low impact, those are thankless tasks. You don't want those. You're looking for the ones that are quick wins and projects that might take a lot of effort, but they're still going to be high impact. So it's a great kind of strategic exercise for you and your teams to think about some of these initiatives. And one more here, Milanote. It's basically a digital whiteboard. So when you're collaborating with your teams, it's a way for you to drop links and images and websites and drawings and things in real time so that as you're doing your Zoom calls, you can kind of collaborate on a digital whiteboard. I know I miss my whiteboard. But anyways, there's a ton here. If you go to hackpack.app, there's over 200 of them. And hope this helped.
That's awesome.
That's totally awesome. And I think that's awesome because it sort of leads into exactly my main point, which is there's so much shit you could be doing right now. You can't do it all. You can't go through 200 things. I think it's awesome, Brad, that you guys did that. But my number one really related to the effort impact matrix, which is prioritize. So, when your body is under stress, right? Like if you have, one time I was backpacking, fell in a creek, got like instant hypothermia, right? Your body draws everything to the core to keep everything alive. And I want to make sure that, you should use Brad's resources to learn and get smart. I want to caution everybody about trying to do it all. You need to take that last point that he was making about figuring out the priorities and figure out what your core organs are that you need to send the juice to keep this thing pumping. Because I'm just telling you, you can distract yourself. You can confuse your busyness with effectiveness, and you can be real busy implementing new tools. And I'm not saying you shouldn't, but find yourself really not making any progress. So, if you're dizzy from plate spinning, I caution you, to adding more plates. I would say my number one thing in the short term, in other words, would be to be ruthless. What do I need to do? What can't I do? If you find yourself with extra time, then I think that's the time to use like the tool Brad showed, the impact effort matrix, to try to figure out where your priorities are and put all your energies into that. We call it the 120 rule. So you've heard the 80-20 rule, right? Like put 80% of your results come from 20% of the effort. I'm saying put 100, figure out what the opposite, 20% what is it? 80%. I got myself all confused. The what you want to do is you want to put all your focus on the few things that are actually going to work, not spreading your focus. And I know that's not, again, these marketing things is coming more from an operator standpoint. I just think that the goal is not to run a mile in a circle. The goal is to run a mile straight ahead in the right direction, right? So as Cody on my team always uses this phrase, just head north. The goal is to figure out where your north is and take a step that direction. Don't be taking 2 steps that direction, 3 steps that direction, whatever. Find your general north. It's okay if it's not perfect, and head that way. And I don't mean any of that, I hope you know, Brad, as an insult against any. I think that's awesome, and I'm totally going to go rip off those resources. But I think I just want to make it be clear about how we think you should be using them.
No offense taken. Yeah.
Well, good. We have successfully avoided our first panelist cage match. But I think all of those are really important points. That the resources that Brad shared and that Megan's going to share with us as well, we'll definitely send out to this group in a follow-up email. And I think the larger point being you do have tools that can help you adapt what you are already doing to an online environment. And I think, to speak to Jeff's point, it's just be cautious, right? And keep the main thing, whatever that is for you. But don't let yourself get distracted by all the fun tools that are out there. Speaking for myself, I know that it can be easy to do. I think one of the other thoughts that we had as we thought about this session was to think through, if you're seeing anyone out in the market, be it a large company, a small company, that you would recommend people take a look at that has adapted really well, or if if you have any clients that you think have done really well in this time, would just be curious to kind of see examples of companies that are successful. And it doesn't have to only be during this time necessarily, but as you alluded to earlier, this is, well, unprecedented in a lot of ways, certainly not unprecedented in terms of difficult economic times. But just thinking through of, any examples that you would point folks to see how it can be done well.
Yeah. One example that comes to mind for me is love them or hate them, HubSpot. They've launched, maybe lots of you have seen it already. They've launched Adapt 2020, which is their kind of education campaign on how to survive and thrive. So, as with everything HubSpot, they point you back to their own products and suite of services. So that's great. That's their own marketing strategy. But what they've also done is repackage a lot of existing content that they had. So they aren't, to your point, Jeff, reinventing the wheel, going after a new shiny thing. They're pulling in what they already think, repackaging it and kind of positioning it to help educate audiences. So they're just, I think they're like, hang on, I'm looking at the website right now. I think it's offers.hubs. I think it's hubspot.com adapt 2020, something like that. You've got they have webinars and sort of virtual events every week.
Yeah. So the first ones that come to my mind are the companies that have been able to shift the model a little bit and give back. I just saw last night that locally the Sunrise Cafe is turned their restaurants into grocery stores, like little stores. I bought a box of food from Fork, the restaurant Fork, that I could buy chicken and onions and whatever, and bought a meal not prepped effectively from them. I thought that was genius. I think a lot of our downtown restaurants have done a great job right here in Boise. Simplot comes to mind. They just ran an effort, what we call they're a client of mine, neighborhood food raiser, where they normally sell into the restaurant channel primarily food service, and they shifted to sell some of their frozen foods and veggies into sell online that you could pick up in Nampa or Buell. They sold out in a day, and then they're giving the money, the proceeds of that, to COVID relief. So I think those are all examples where they're shifting their actual model to fit as well. I mean, Cody on my team points out that like Square shifted and pushed up their ability to take online orders and or via a website, to have an instant website builder. They push that project up. So I think all those are they're more product focused than they are messaging focused. I think a lot of the messaging, especially in these early stages where I would say they've done a really good job, it's been the people who've been quiet. I mean, I think there's a lot of people, I think a lot of the best people who are doing the smart thing are the people who are invisible, in my opinion, at least in the first 2 weeks. I think like we've seen in the travel space, we've seen somebody shared a travel Wyoming ad for me, and it was all about, social distancing and sort of cliche. And to me, that sort of struck a weird tone. It struck a marketing BS tone around this serious issue, even though the creative was good and maybe it's effective. I don't know. I think, the people who are doing the best are the people who are sticking with their strategy, their big picture strategy, their guiding strategy, and molding their messages to that instead of sort of being totally reactive. Now, if you're in startup stage, I'm sorry to keep rambling, but I think, a key thing that we haven't really discussed about here is, the advice totally differs if you're sort of a startup, a stealth startup, a startup with runway, a stage, a post-revenue startup, with no runway. If you're enterprise versus consumer, all these things really vary what success looks like. So I know that doesn't really fit into this question, but I guess I want to make sure that we understand that the advice you're going to get and give is going to be based on really the stage of company you are, as much as, just selling more stuff. So. Sorry, again, off track. That's what I do.
Oh, good. I loved your reference to some of the restaurants. I think just looking at the restaurant industry in general, one, because of what they had to do to their entire business model overnight and try to find unique delivery methods. And then the second is some of the content they're sharing on social is awesome. So clever and so timely. I'll point to one of our clients, actually, Killer Creamery. They're a zero sugar keto ice cream. I love really timely content right now, especially because everybody wants a laugh. When they get on social, most of us are looking for a distraction, a little entertainment. And so for April Fools, this was a combination of a couple things. So for April Fools, they released a limited edition Tiger King pint. And I'll actually quickly share it here just so you can see what I'm talking about, because it probably doesn't make any sense. So this was an April Fool's pint that we came out with called Lions and Tigers and Mullets Oh My, and it's the nutty nut flavor with nut pieces. And it's just funny. It was just a really great piece of content on April Fool's Day around a show that everybody was talking about at the time, and trying to come up with that kind of stuff that's timely and a part of culture. That's what a lot of people are looking for right now.
I like it. Nutty nut flavor with nice pieces of nuts.
I think that's a great example, Nick. Like a consumer product is going to handle the situation totally different than a B2B product is going to handle it. Right?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of pressure on our clients in the B2B tech space to start giving things away for free, seeing what companies like Microsoft and others have been able to do in response or have felt pressure to do. So we've had a lot of conversations about, is this the moment when we need to offer a free version, or we need to donate a free version to this particular group, or establish new relationships with public school systems that we didn't have before. So it's been interesting to see some of the software companies that we work with start to wrestle with that from a product strategy perspective.
Well, I think, that brings up a really interesting dichotomy that I think Jeff touched on a little bit, but, on one hand, we have, a multi-billion-dollar food conglomerate that spreads across several continents, shifting their strategy a bit. On the other hand, we have a company that is a fledgling startup who's also a Trailhead alum with Killer Creamery, Louis Armstrong and that group. But what are those things? And I think most of the folks on this call probably are on the closer to the Killer Creamery side of the spectrum, early stage startups. What are some of those ideas, strategies, and how they might differ from a company that may be able to give things away at cost or completely free? What are you advising some of those early stage companies and how to weather these times, Megan, as they do get more pressure like that?
Well, a big piece of it comes back to what we were talking about, what I said earlier, knowing your audience. For example, we work with Craft Distiller brand out here and a few other small food and beverage brands across our West Coast offices. And, what are people saying on Nextdoor? Paying attention to what people are talking about in their neighborhoods, because at the moment, people can't really leave their neighborhoods. And so knowing whether you're in an urban area or in a more, dispersed area, tightly populated urban area or a more dispersed area, knowing what people are doing in their homes and kind of in their neighborhood and how to be involved in that conversation. I'm seeing on my street, and this is anecdotal, not evidence, but, not data, but when you see people on the street getting together for happy hours, 6 to 8 feet apart in their lawn chairs, what are they drinking? What are they talking about? So sort of paying more attention to what's happening at a neighborhood by neighborhood basis for those smaller brands for whom local product sales matter a lot. That's one of the pieces of advice we're giving. And a lot of it is just listening advice. It's not go find an agency to do a big media buy on Nextdoor, right? Ring is advertising on Nextdoor. That's not necessarily a place that a lot of brands can afford at the smaller end of the scale. So, listening and paying attention on a sort of neighborhood basis is something that we've been talking a lot about with local brands that we work with.
Yeah, I think for me, again, it depends on the business. And so I'm going to lean on a couple of examples because it's hard to give advice kind of in a general sense. But one of our clients, Payette Brewing, a brewery, their tap room's closed and really tough. It hit overnight and saw a dip in sales. And so it was an immediate rush to what kind of creative solutions can we come up with to help them out. And we've played with this idea of launching a virtual tap room where you can go in and do trivia night and literally just be involved. Now, how you sell things in a virtual tap room is a vastly different challenge. And it's more of just staying involved in the community and reminding people that when this thing does come back, we would love to have you. And you just keeping it top of mind for people. Another one of our clients, Happy Day, they sell coffee, chocolate, oatmeal, etc. They're seeing a boom. They're a grocery product, and so they're seeing they're benefiting from all this. And so it's how can we share that success and how can we take this opportunity to potentially launch new products? And right now we're in front of all of these different buyers and all of these different stores, and they're eager to get more things on the shelf. And so it's an amazing sales opportunity for us to get in with some new products. Those are just two examples, vastly different. And that's where the challenge lies, is it depends on the industry and company.
Yeah. And I'll play off, Nick, you said most of these companies are sort of, most people on the call right now are closer to the Lewis situation, the Killer Creamery situation, early-ish stage, right? And so if I'm in their shoes, I'm thinking, how do I attribute every action I'm doing to either to a dollar or survival? So I want my, there's real power laws involved in all those things. Most companies don't have great marketing success by doing 1,000 different things. They usually find a couple levers that they pull that really drive growth, especially startups. And so I'm really on the hunt for those. I'm trying to attribute my effort to my return right now. That's what I'm trying to do. That said, we are also having this whole conversation, we're like looking at it, we're this close and trying to look at something that is going to look totally different in 2 weeks and 2 months. I mean, I think a lot of this is going to be totally normal, in a month or something like that. I mean, like we can kind of get over sort of hopefully the downtroddenness of all this. I mean, I know last week we sent out a monthly email to subscribers, and we intentionally made it COVID free. And I put a little note at the top, that said, this is like without COVID references intentionally. And I got more positive responses to that note. Like, thank God you're not hitting me over the head with COVID than I've gotten up from any other email. So I think a lot of this really comes down to, the future of marketing is humanity, it's humanness, despite all this technology. What can you do right now that is more human than you've ever done before? If you're a startup, listen, brand and all that stuff, that's awesome. That's great. I'm, big fan. But how can you create irresistible value in your product and communicate that value to the people that most need it? That's what startups need to be doing right now, and really focused. I know that's sort of in startup land, product is marketing. There's no difference. So I would be really focused there, especially if I'm early stage. If I'm in the building stage, and I have resources, I'm doubling down on that. So one startup I work with, they had to furlough some employees, and they're trying hard not to do more. So my recommendation was, what can we shift them to that, they're building value for the future, irresistible value for the future. So trying to use all those resources to something that is going to generate revenue, because frankly, startups don't survive on good wishes and clever headlines. They survive and thrive because they make amazing ass products. By the way, my daughter's addicted to Killer Creamery, so her college fund is going there. Also, just a thought that, a lot of companies are trying to, everybody knows the situation. We're all familiar with the context. You could sell an annual plans. You could sell, get more commitments. You can give more value up front if you have bandwidth. I don't think personally now's the time to be like, when I say you want revenue, you don't want it to be theoretical revenue. You want it to be actual, revenue hopes, right? So what I mean by that is, if you can go above and beyond and get paid, and you have bandwidth to go above and beyond, go above and beyond. Don't sit there and pretend that you're giving away some fake, resource. If it's downtime, use that downtime to generate value and get paid for that value now for the small group of fans that believe. Hope that makes sense.
So as I'm sitting here listening to you guys, a couple of takeaways from me. One is that too often I assume I know all about marketing, and then I have a Zoom chat like this and I realize that I don't know all that much about marketing. And so, with the situation, the immediacy of the situation has me as a business leader of an organization, has me thinking about today and tomorrow. What I'm hearing you guys saying is, well, that's important. And yes, there are things you can do. You can use this hack pack that Brad put together for Survive to Thrive. But what I'm really hearing is that you ought to think about the medium term and the long term. And so as I picture that in my head, for example, as a startup, as a nonprofit, it sounds expensive to me. And I'm waiting for the Paycheck Protection Program a loan to be released to Trailhead. Until then, I can't even think about outsourcing this kind of work. But if I want to work, which I need to, with either of the three of you, and Meghan, you alluded to this earlier, how may I get creative? Are there structures in which marketing agencies can maybe partake in the success of a specific campaign? Meaning, hey, let's do this together. If our revenue goes up, we both get paid. And I'm just throwing that one out as an example. Are there creative ways for organizations like mine who definitely need the help, but maybe can't afford it right now? Any thoughts? And I'm realizing that I'm asking marketers for a discount here publicly on Zoom, but
Hey, TM, call me. Happy to take your call. No, I think I just want to say, I'll let other people answer the real question, but I think what we're trying to, I think, say is that if we had magic bullets, we would hand over the magic bullets. There are not magic bullets. Like, it's just harder, like you know what I mean? So I'm not saying, I think your idea, and I'm certainly willing to talk and do talk with people all the time and try to give advice, but it's not to sort of give them my magic bullets because it's the Seth Godin quote, marketing is a process, not an event. And I think we are just in the midst, we're at one data point in this process, and we're trying to pretend that it's something different than that there's some magic that we can change that data point. And I mean, maybe Meghan or Brad have those bullets. If you do, let me know. I would love to get in on that situation. I'll invest.
If I did, I probably, would have written a book like Seth, or several books like Seth Godin did. I agree. There aren't magic bullets. And I also, Brad, Jeff, I am thinking you probably agree on this. I've been doing this a while. I don't know anybody who's trying to hide their magic bullets. I had a boss once. She was a mentor for a long time. She's great. One of the grand doyens of PR out east. And, she once said, we were having a kind of a conversation with a client, and it was getting a little sticky, and the client was saying, well, basically what results have you gotten from talking to members of the media? And we're giving them the update, and they say, listen, send us your list, send us all the contacts that you've been in touch with, and give us all the information. Which, when you've been doing this for a while, that when your customers and your clients are asking you for that kind of detail, the problem is not the detail, right? There's a bigger or different problem that you've got to solve. So putting that aside, we're sort of going back and forth as a team. Do we send them our list? Do we not? Do we send them this, this document? And she looks at me and she says, you know what? You can hand somebody a cookbook, but that doesn't make them Julia Child, right? And so, like Jeff, like Brad, I am always happy to be very transparent and share as much advice and as many ideas as possible. But there's it is a process. It's a process that requires testing and learning over time. And you're right, Tim. There are lots of companies who don't feel like they've got that kind of runway, and that makes perfect sense. So yeah, from a practical standpoint, from an operational standpoint, our team has gotten creative on how we can have those conversations. What used to be minimum 6-month retainers are now looking at short-term projects and, sort of mini consulting opportunities, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it does take time to really see the value. And so we always hesitate there, not just from a business model perspective, because yes, our biggest cost, our biggest piece of overhead is our people. They're salaried employees. We don't spool them up and then spool them down based on a project. We're not a team of freelancers. So we've got to deal with that. But separate from that, we don't want to engage with an organization like yours where we say, let's just do something for a month. Let's just focus in and get some stuff done for a month. And then as 28 days comes up and you're like, but we need to see more, we need to see different, we need to iterate. There's no wiggle room there. There's no opportunity to shift. So I don't know if that, speaking of tangents, I feel like I just went off on a bit of a tangent, but I think that's part of the challenge operationally and in terms of budgets. But in terms of just being members of a community where we want to try and help people do what they need to do to survive and to thrive, doors always open, emails always open, always happy to share ideas and offer advice. I don't know if that's helpful or if it even answers your question.
So like Meghan, not to take the questionnaire role, or Brad, when somebody calls you and says, what's the one piece of advice or 2 pieces of advice that you would give me just generically to solve the problems to get to TM's point? What would be just your 1 or 2, like simple?
Focus.
Yes.
And measure.
What'd you say, Brad?
I was just going to say, let's just get to the plan. I think these calls typically come pretty tactically, and I just would rather elevate them to a more strategic call. Another strategic process we like to go through is moats, bridges, and boats. So what are the things that you're going to carve a moat around? What are the things that you can build a bridge to that are easy for you to grow into? And then what are the far reaching boats that you need to take to get to bigger tactics? And think about that as today, tomorrow, and then what the later this year could look like. And think about those things that you have to protect, the things that you think you can grow into near term, and the things that you are a little bit far reaching goals that you might be able to get to later this year. And then that helps develop a little bit of a strategy. And then we can talk tactics on what we can find successful. So I would just elevate the conversation to strategy first, and then work your way down to tactics.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, my answer to you, Jeff, was focus and measure. And the reason those two words came to mind were, to exactly your point, Brad. Focus on what are your biggest business problems and who are your customers, and then be able to measure anything that you try, right? Those two things are sort of fundamental pillars to the strategy and to the plan.
Listen, the goal right now totally is to figure out what works, figure out what doesn't, and do more of the former and less of the latter.
Yeah.
I mean, not rocket science, but it's easy said and hard to do.
Absolutely. I always like to say it's simple, but it's not easy.
Well, I think that's all excellent advice, and it's not rocket science. You heard it here first. It'll
be every marketer's epitaph. It wasn't rocket science.
But I think you're right. It's simple, but it's not easy. And I think also the idea of this is an ongoing process, and to have the perspective to realize that you're at a stage in that process, and it might be a more difficult stage, but just to have that long-term perspective and think about what you're doing today, how will that lead to success in the short and long term for you and for your company, I think is a really just helpful thought. And I think you all are obviously taking long-term perspectives in your companies as well as in your clients' companies. And so it's been really refreshing to have that, your thoughts shared here, as well as all the different resources. Tim, I don't know if there were any other questions that you had or that we had from the group, but I know that we typically run these right around 60 minutes. So maybe I'll throw it over to you if there are any other questions, and if not, then we can begin to wrap up.
There are two more questions, fairly tactical. Let me read off one, and then maybe we can just end it with that. The question is, with so many people experiencing financial challenges right now, how can a company selling wants, not needs, stay relevant in their marketing? So in other words, if you're selling something that people, they want it, they don't need it necessarily, it's not maybe essential, part of their budget, how do you stay relevant? In other words, how do you keep them buying your product? Any thoughts on that hack?
I'll just start off by saying create the need. If it's a want, just create the need. Empathize with what your customer's going through, understand their lifestyle, understand the ways that you could potentially help them, and message to that.
Yeah, I think this is why the advertising industry invented psychographics instead of demographics as a way to understand people's motivations, right? One person's want is another person's need, and vice versa. So, I remember reading at the beginning of the crisis, somebody made a comment on Twitter to the effect of, yes, as you're figuring out how to get your supplies in place and have some pantry staples, buy yourself some chocolate. And for some people, that comment was a little superfluous, right? It was a little, like, why concentrate on something so trivial? To other people, it was like, you know what? Yes, treat yourself. Like that's important now still. So, wherever that want becomes a need in the person's mind, in the mind of your audience, again, it's knowing who that audience is and know who your first 1,000 super fans are and why they bought your stuff in the first place. Tap into that, double down on them, and find more of them.
And I'll try not to say this just in the same thing in a different way, but the basic idea here is that your product shouldn't be for everybody. Like no There's no such thing as a need for everybody beyond maybe food and housing. And even that, you know, there's a big difference between Whole Foods and whatever, right? So I think, again, that's like a strategic thought. But the whole point, what I do is I go back to community building. Like, what can I do to build on what Meghan was saying, those 1,000 true fans or whatever you want to call them, and try to build from a place of community and identity, less than sort of a feature benefit sell. But my real answer is get out of the wants business and figure out how to make your product a need. That's the real answer to that question.
I'm glad I asked the question. Yeah, turn wants into needs.
And I just wish that Jeff would have really shared what he thought with us once, just once on this call. Speak your mind, Jeff.
I've held back.
Well, you know, thank you to all of you. I think this has been really illuminating as we've talked about everything from, you know, leveraging technology to getting back to basics, maintaining those human relationships, you know, to focus on what you really have to be as a company, and what some of those things that you're doing might be wants rather than needs. I know that just for me, this has been really useful, and I hope for our audience as well. I'll follow up with Meghan, Brad, and Jeff if you have any materials that you'd like us to distribute as part of our follow-up to these groups. And thank you again for your time and for joining us. While we have everyone on the call, a week from today on the 21st, we'll have another Survive to Thrive session. This one will be focused on technical co-founders. So some early stage startups that may be looking for technical co-founders, and some tips and tricks around that. We'll have a couple of guests from Vinyl, as well as a guest from Partner Hero. And with, you know, unfortunately, some of the companies across the country, but locally here as well, that have had to get rid of some top tech talent, there are also opportunities for those folks and for some of the startups in our community. So we're going to take